Corrupt businessman fires pregnant fiancée. 20 years later, she returns as his boss, and what she does is unbelievable. Hello, welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. In the cutthroat world of haute cuisine, a tale of betrayal and redemption unfolds as Rachel, once a rising star chef cruelly cast aside, returns to judge the man who shattered her dreams. As knives sharpen and secrets simmer, the stage is set for a culinary showdown where more than just reputations are on the line. The aroma of sizzling garlic and fresh herbs filled the bustling kitchen of Le Petit Jardin, one of New York City's most acclaimed restaurants. Rachel Thompson, a vibrant 28-year-old sous chef with fiery red hair and emerald eyes that sparkled with passion, moved with graceful precision as she orchestrated the evening's culinary symphony. Her colleagues admired her unwavering focus and creativity, whispering that she was destined for greatness. As Rachel put the finishing touches on a delicate soufflé, she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She steadied herself against the cool stainless steel counter, taking a deep breath. It was the third time this week she'd felt queasy, and a suspicion had begun to form in her mind. She glanced across the kitchen, catching the eye of Anthony Delmonico, the restaurant's owner and head chef. His rugged good looks and charismatic smile had won her heart 2 years ago, and now they were engaged to be married. Anthony gave her a quick wink before turning his attention back to the lobster bisque he was perfecting. Rachel's hand instinctively moved to her stomach, a mix of excitement and anxiety bubbling up inside her. She hadn't told Anthony about her suspicions yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news that could change both their lives forever. As the dinner service wound down, Rachel found a quiet moment to slip away to the staff bathroom. With trembling hands, she pulled a pregnancy test from her bag and waited for the results with bated breath. When 2 pink lines appeared, confirming her suspicions, a kaleidoscope of emotions washed over her: joy, fear, and an overwhelming sense of love for the tiny life growing inside her. Emerging from the bathroom, Rachel's mind raced with thoughts of how to tell Anthony. She imagined his face lighting up with joy, his strong arms enveloping her in a celebratory embrace. Lost in her reverie, she nearly collided with Mia, one of the line cooks. "Whoa, Rachel, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," Mia said, steadying her friend. Rachel hesitated for a moment before breaking into a radiant smile. "I'm more than okay, Mia. I'm pregnant." Mia's eyes widened with excitement. "Oh my God, Rachel, that's amazing. Does Anthony know yet?" "Not yet," Rachel replied, her voice lowering conspiratorially. "I'm going to tell him tonight after we close up. I can't wait to see his face." As the last customers trickled out and the kitchen staff began the nightly cleanup, Rachel's anticipation grew. She watched Anthony moving about the kitchen, barking orders and tasting sauces, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. When the last pot was scrubbed and the floors were mopped to a shine, Rachel approached Anthony, her heart pounding. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Anthony glanced up from the clipboard he was studying, his brow furrowed. "Can it wait, babe? I've got to finalize the order for tomorrow's shipment." Rachel took a deep breath, steeling her nerves. "It's important, Anthony. I have some news." Something in her tone made Anthony pause. He set down the clipboard and gave her his full attention. "What's going on, Rach?" Rachel's hand unconsciously moved to her stomach as she looked into Anthony's eyes. "I'm pregnant," she said softly, a smile spreading across her face. The silence that followed was deafening. Anthony's expression shifted from surprise to confusion, and then, to Rachel's horror, to something that looked unsettlingly like anger. "You're what?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. Rachel's smile faltered. "I'm pregnant, Anthony. We're going to have a baby." Anthony ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenching. "How could this happen? We were careful. I know it's unexpected, but isn't it wonderful?" Rachel reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Wonderful," Anthony scoffed. "Rachel, we're on the verge of getting our first Michelin star. I'm about to launch a new menu that could put us on the map." How the hell are we supposed to do all that with a baby? Rachel felt as if she'd been slapped. But I thought you'd be happy. We've talked about having a family someday. Someday, Rachel. Not now. Anthony's voice rose, echoing off the stainless steel surfaces of the empty kitchen. Do you have any idea what this could do to our careers? To the restaurant? Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes. I thought our love was stronger than that. I thought we were in this together. Anthony's expression hardened. Well, you thought wrong. I can't do this, Rachel. I won't. What are you saying? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying that if you want to keep this baby, you can't stay here, at the restaurant or with me. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Rachel struggled to comprehend Anthony's words. You're making me choose between our baby and my career? Between our child and you? Anthony's silence was all the answer she needed. Rachel felt a surge of anger and determination rise within her. Fine, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I choose our baby. I choose a future filled with love over a man who would abandon his child and the woman he claimed to love. With shaking hands, Rachel untied her apron and tossed it onto the counter. She slipped off her engagement ring and placed it next to the apron. Goodbye, Anthony. I hope your precious star keeps you warm at night. As Rachel walked out of Le Petit Jardin for the last time, she felt a strange mix of heartbreak and liberation. The future she had imagined with Anthony lay in ruins, but as she placed a protective hand over her stomach, she knew that a new, unexpected journey was just beginning. 20 years passed in the blink of an eye, each day a step further from that fateful night in Le Petit Jardin. Rachel Thompson, now 48, stood before the full-length mirror in her Manhattan penthouse, adjusting the lapel of her impeccably tailored blazer. The years had been kind to her. Her fiery red hair was now streaked with elegant strands of silver, and laugh lines framed her still vibrant green eyes, a testament to a life lived with passion and purpose. Gone was the young, naive chef who had once placed her heart in the hands of a man who proved unworthy. In her place stood a woman who had carved her own path to success, becoming one of the most respected figures in the culinary world. Rachel's journey hadn't been easy, but it had been rewarding beyond her wildest dreams. As she applied a final touch of lipstick, a soft knock on the bedroom door drew her attention. "Come in," she called out, smiling as her daughter, Lily, poked her head into the room. At 19, Lily was the spitting image of Rachel at that age. All fire and determination, with a dash of mischief in her eyes. "Mom, are you nervous about today?" she asked, flopping onto the king-sized bed. Rachel chuckled, sitting down beside her daughter. "Nervous? No. Excited? Absolutely." Lily raised an eyebrow, a gesture so reminiscent of Rachel that it made her heart swell. "Even though you might see him?" The question hung in the air, loaded with 2 decades of history. Rachel took a moment before answering, choosing her words carefully. "Honey, what happened with your father was a lifetime ago. I've made peace with it. Today isn't about the past. It's about celebrating the future of culinary arts." Lily nodded, but Rachel could see the wheels turning in her daughter's mind. "I still can't believe you never told him about me," Lily mused, twirling a strand of her auburn hair around her finger. Rachel sighed, a familiar pang of guilt tugging at her heart. "I know it's hard to understand, but at the time it felt like the right decision. Anthony made it clear he didn't want to be a father. I wanted to protect you from that rejection. And now," Lily pressed, her gaze intense. "Now," Rachel said, cupping her daughter's cheek. "You're old enough to make your own decisions about whether you want him in your life. But remember, biology doesn't make a parent. Love does." Lily leaned into her mother's touch, a small smile playing on her lips. "I know, Mom. You've been more than enough for me. I guess I'm curious about him." Rachel nodded, understanding all too well the pull of the unknown. "Well, who knows? Maybe our paths will cross during the competition. But for now," she said, standing up and smoothing out her blazer, "I've got a car waiting to take me to the studio. Wish me luck." Lily jumped up, enveloping her mother in a fierce hug. "You don't need luck, Mom. You're going to be amazing." As Rachel stepped into the sleek black car that would whisk her to the studios of Culinary Masters, the most prestigious cooking competition show in America, she felt a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. For years, she had politely declined invitations to judge on various cooking shows, preferring to focus on her restaurants and her daughter. But when the producers of Culinary Masters had approached her about being the head judge for their upcoming season, something had felt different. Maybe it was the show's reputation for discovering and nurturing true culinary talent. Or perhaps it was the challenge of stepping into a new role, one that would allow her to shape the future of the industry she loved. Whatever the reason, Rachel had found herself saying yes, much to the delight of the producers and her fans. As the car wound its way through the bustling streets of New York, Rachel's mind drifted to the contestants she would be meeting today. 10 chefs from across the country, each with their own unique story and style, all vying for the chance to win $250,000 and have their own restaurant backed by some of the biggest names in the industry. She wondered about their backgrounds, their inspirations, the journeys that had led them to this moment. Little did Rachel know that among those 10 contestants was a face from her past, one that would force her to confront the choices she had made 2 decades ago and test the strength of the woman she had become. The car pulled up to the studio, and Rachel took a deep breath, centering herself. As she stepped out onto the red carpet, cameras flashing and reporters calling her name, she plastered on her most dazzling smile. This was her element now, the limelight, the pressure, the expectation of excellence. Rachel, how does it feel to be joining Culinary Masters as head judge?" a reporter shouted over the din. Rachel turned, her green eyes sparkling. "It feels like coming home," she replied smoothly. "I started my journey in a humble kitchen, and now I have the privilege of helping shape the next generation of culinary stars. It's a responsibility I don't take lightly." As she made her way into the studio, gracefully fielding questions and posing for photos, Rachel felt a surge of excitement. She was ready for this new challenge, ready to share her knowledge and passion with these aspiring chefs. The production assistant ushered her towards the set, where the other judges were waiting. As Rachel rounded the corner, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing among the group of culinary experts, was a face she hadn't seen in 20 years but would recognize anywhere. Anthony Delmonico. He had aged well, his once jet-black hair now peppered with gray, laugh lines creasing the corners of his eyes. But his stance was unmistakable, the same confident posture that had once made her weak in the knees. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still as their eyes met across the room. Rachel saw a flicker of recognition, then surprise, and finally something unreadable pass across Anthony's face. Taking a deep breath, Rachel steeled herself and strode forward, her head held high. She had come too far and overcome too much to let the ghosts of her past unsettle her now. As she approached the group, she extended her hand to Anthony, a polite smile fixed firmly in place. "Anthony," she said, her voice steady and professional. "It's been a long time." Anthony took her hand, his grip firm but hesitant. "Rachel," he replied, his voice a mix of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. "I had no idea you'd be here. Life is full of surprises," Rachel said, her tone light but her eyes conveying a depth of meaning only Anthony could understand. "I look forward to working with you on the show." Before Anthony could respond, the director called for everyone to take their places. As Rachel settled into her seat at the judge's table, she couldn't help but feel that the universe had a twisted sense of humor. Here she was, about to judge a competition that included the man who had once judged her unworthy of his love and support. But as the lights came up and the cameras began to roll, Rachel pushed all thoughts of the past aside. She had a job to do, and she was determined to do it with the grace, expertise, and passion that had become her trademark. Little did she know that the events about to unfold would not only challenge her professionally, but would also force her to confront the unresolved emotions of her past, leading to a series of revelations that would change everything she thought she knew about that fateful night 20 years ago. The first day of filming Culinary Masters was a whirlwind of activity. As the 10 contestants filed onto the set, their eyes wide with a mix of excitement and trepidation, Rachel felt a surge of empathy. She remembered all too well the nervous energy of a young chef trying to prove themselves. The contestants lined up before the judges' panel, and Rachel took a moment to study each face. They were a diverse group, ranging from fresh-faced culinary school graduates to seasoned chefs looking for their big break. But it was the last contestant in line who caught her attention and made her heart skip a beat. He was young, maybe in his early 20s, with a shock of red hair that was all too familiar. As Rachel's eyes met his, she saw a flash of recognition followed by a look of determination. This had to be Anthony's son. Their similarities were unmistakable. But how was this possible? Had Anthony moved on so quickly after their breakup? Rachel's thoughts were interrupted as the host, celebrity chef Marco Rossi, began introducing the judges. And of course, our head judge, the incomparable Rachel Thompson. Rachel, what are you looking for in our contestants this season? Pushing aside her personal shock, Rachel leaned into the microphone. I'm looking for passion, creativity, and the ability to tell a story through food. But most importantly, I want to see growth. This competition isn't just about who's the best chef on day one. It's about who can learn, adapt, and push themselves to new heights. As she spoke, Rachel couldn't help but notice Anthony shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw a mix of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. The first challenge was announced. Create a dish that represented a pivotal moment in their culinary journey. As the contestants scrambled to their stations, Rachel found herself drawn to the young redhead. She watched as he worked with a focused intensity that was achingly familiar. Throughout the cooking process, Rachel forced herself to remain impartial, offering critique and encouragement to all contestants equally. But when it came time for judging, she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation as the young man, introduced as Jake Delmonico, presented his dish. I've prepared a deconstructed apple pie, Jake explained, his voice steady despite the nerves evident in his eyes. It represents the moment I realized that cooking wasn't just about following recipes, but about understanding flavors and textures on a deeper level. As Rachel tasted the dish, she was transported back to her own early days in the kitchen. The flavors were bold yet harmonious, showing a sophistication beyond Jake's years. This is remarkable, she said, struggling to maintain her composure. The balance of sweet and tart, the play of textures. It's clear you have a natural talent for composition. Jake beamed at the praise, and for a moment, Rachel saw herself in his proud stance. She glanced at Anthony, whose face was a mask of conflicting emotions. As the day's filming wrapped up, Rachel found herself cornered by Anthony in a quiet hallway. We need to talk, he said, his voice low and urgent. Rachel squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze evenly. About what, Anthony? The weather? The competition? Or the 20 years of silence? Anthony ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Rachel's heart ache. About Jake, he said finally. He's my son. Rachel felt a wave of emotions crash over her. Anger, confusion, hurt. I gathered as much, she said coolly. He has your eyes. Rachel, it's not what you think, Anthony began, but Rachel held up a hand to stop him. Save it, Anthony. Whatever explanation you have, I'm not sure I want to hear it. We're here to judge a cooking competition. Nothing more. As she turned to leave, Anthony called out, He's your son too, Rachel. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Rachel froze, her hand on the door handle. Slowly, she turned back to face Anthony, her eyes wide with disbelief. What did you just say? The revelation hit Rachel like a tidal wave, threatening to sweep away the carefully constructed life she'd built over the past 2 decades. She stumbled backward, grateful for the wall supporting her as her legs threatened to give way. That's impossible, she whispered, her mind racing. I would have known. I would have. Anthony stepped closer, his eyes pleading. I didn't know either, not until a few years ago. Rachel, please, let me explain. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the tension. Marco, the show's host, rounded the corner, his face lighting up at the sight of them. "Ah, there you are. We need you both for a quick production meeting." Rachel straightened, smoothing her blazer with trembling hands. "We'll be right there, Marco," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. To Anthony, she hissed, "This isn't over. Meet me at the hotel bar after the meeting. We clearly have a lot to discuss." The production meeting dragged on interminably, but Rachel barely heard a word. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions and emotions. How could Jake be her son? Why hadn't she known? And perhaps most pressingly, how would this revelation affect the competition? As soon as they were dismissed, Rachel made her way to the hotel bar, ordering a stiff drink to steady her nerves. Anthony joined her moments later, sliding onto the bar stool beside her with a heavy sigh. "Start talking," Rachel demanded, her voice low and controlled. Anthony took a deep breath. "After you left that night, I was a mess. I threw myself into work, trying to forget. A few weeks later, I got a call from a woman named Claire. She said she was your friend and that you'd asked her to pack up your things from the apartment." Rachel's brow furrowed. "I don't know any Claire." "Neither did I," Anthony continued. "But she seemed to know details about our life together, so I didn't question it. She came to the apartment, packed your stuff, and left. It wasn't until years later that I found out the truth." "Which was?" Rachel prompted, her patience wearing thin. "Claire was working for my mother," Anthony said, his voice heavy with regret. "My mother never approved of our relationship. She thought you were holding me back from my full potential. When she found out you were pregnant, she saw an opportunity." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face as the pieces began to fall into place. "Your mother? She's the one who told you to choose between me and the baby, isn't she?" Anthony nodded, unable to meet Rachel's eyes. "She manipulated both of us. She convinced me that you'd be better off without me, that I'd only hold you back. And then she made sure you thought I had abandoned you." "But Jake," Rachel's voice trailed off, her mind still struggling to process the information. "Claire was actually pregnant herself," Anthony explained. "My mother paid her to pretend to be you, to take the baby and raise him as her own. She told me you had decided to give the baby up for adoption, that it was for the best." Rachel's hand tightened around her glass, her knuckles turning white. "And you believed her? You didn't think to question any of this?" Anthony's shoulders slumped. "I was young, scared, and stupid. I trusted my mother when I should have trusted you." It wasn't until Jake turned 18 and started asking questions about his birth parents that the truth came out. A heavy silence fell between them. Rachel's mind was reeling, trying to reconcile this new information with the narrative she'd believed for so long. "So, Jake doesn't know? About me? I mean," Anthony shook his head. "He knows he's adopted, and he knows I'm his biological father, but he doesn't know about you. I wasn't sure how to tell him." Rachel drained her glass, signaling the bartender for another. "This is a lot to process, Anthony. I need time to think." "I understand," Anthony said softly. "But Rachel, there's something else you should know. Jake, he idolizes you. He's followed your career, read all your books. It's why he wanted to be on this show so badly." A lump formed in Rachel's throat as she thought back to Jake's performance earlier that day, the passion and skill he displayed. "He's talented," she managed to say. "He is," Anthony agreed. "And he has no idea that the woman he's looked up to his entire life is actually his mother." The weight of the situation settled heavily on Rachel's shoulders. She had come to this competition ready to judge impartially, to mentor young chefs and help shape the future of culinary arts. Now, she found herself facing an ethical dilemma she could never have anticipated. "What do we do now?" she asked, more to herself than to Anthony. Anthony reached out, hesitating before placing his hand over hers. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think we owe it to Jake to figure it out together." As Rachel looked into Anthony's eyes, she saw a reflection of her own confusion, regret, and hope. Whatever happened next, she knew that the coming weeks would change all their lives forever. Outside the bar, unbeknownst to Rachel and Anthony, Jake Delmonico lingered in the shadows of the hotel lobby, having overheard snippets of their conversation. His mind raced with questions and possibilities as he tried to make sense of what he'd heard. One thing was certain: this competition had just become about much more than cooking. The next morning, Rachel awoke with a pounding headache and a heart heavy with conflicting emotions. As she prepared for the day's filming, her mind raced with the implications of last night's revelations. How could she possibly judge this competition fairly now? And more importantly, what was she going to do about Jake? As she entered the studio, Rachel's eyes immediately sought out Jake among the contestants. He was at his station, meticulously organizing his mise en place, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sight of him, this young man who was her son, yet a stranger, made her heart clench. "Good morning, chefs." Marco's enthusiastic voice boomed through the studio. "Today's challenge is all about heritage. You'll be creating a dish that represents your family's culinary traditions. You have 1 hour to conceptualize and execute your dish. Your time starts now." Rachel watched as the contestants scrambled into action. Her gaze kept drifting back to Jake, noting the confident way he moved around his station, the creative spark in his eyes as he worked. She felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by a pang of guilt. She had missed so much of his life. As she made her rounds with the other judges, offering critique and encouragement, Rachel found herself standing before Jake's station. He looked up, a mix of nervousness and determination in his eyes. "Chef Thompson," he said, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands. "I'm making a modern take on my grandmother's apple strudel." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She remembered Anthony's mother, a stern woman who had never approved of her. The irony wasn't lost on her. "That sounds intriguing," she managed to say. "Can you tell me more about the significance of this dish?" Jake's eyes lit up as he spoke, his hands never stopping their work. "My dad always talks about how his mother made the best apple strudel. I never got to meet her, but I feel connected to her through this recipe. I'm deconstructing it, playing with textures and temperatures to bring it into the modern era while still honoring its roots." Rachel nodded, fighting to keep her expression neutral. That's beautiful, Jake. I look forward to tasting it." As she walked away, Rachel caught Anthony's eye across the kitchen. The look they shared was laden with unspoken words and shared regret. When it came time for judging, Rachel braced herself. Jake's dish was last to be presented, and as he placed it before the judges, she could see the hope and anxiety warring in his expression. "I present to you a deconstructed apple strudel," Jake announced. "The apple has been prepared 3 ways: a tart green apple sorbet, caramelized apple chips, and a warm spiced apple puree. The pastry element is represented by a delicate phyllo crisp, and I finished it with a vanilla cream and a dusting of cinnamon sugar." As Rachel took her first bite, she was transported. The flavors were perfectly balanced, each element distinct yet harmonious. But more than that, she could taste the love and heritage in every bite. Unbidden, tears sprang to her eyes. "This is exceptional," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've managed to honor tradition while pushing boundaries. It's a perfect representation of culinary heritage evolving through generations." Jake beamed at the praise, and for a moment, Rachel saw herself in his proud stance and bright eyes. She glanced at Anthony, seeing her own mixture of pride and pain mirrored in his expression. As the day's filming wrapped up, Rachel found herself approached by the show's producer, Linda. "Rachel, can I have a word?" Linda asked, her tone serious. "There's been some chatter among the crew. People are noticing your interactions with Jake. We need to ensure there's no perception of favoritism." Rachel felt her stomach drop. "Linda, I can assure you I know you're professional, Rachel," Linda interrupted. "But perception is everything in this industry. We need to address this head-on." As Linda walked away, Rachel leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. She had a decision to make, and soon. The integrity of the competition, Jake's future, and her own conscience all hung in the balance. The following day, Rachel arrived at the studio early, her mind made up. She requested an urgent meeting with Linda and the other executive producers. "I have something I need to disclose," Rachel began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It has recently come to my attention that Jake Delmonico is my biological son." The room erupted in a cacophony of shocked exclamations and rapid-fire questions. Rachel held up a hand, silencing them. "I only discovered this 2 days ago. Jake doesn't know, and until now, neither did I." Linda leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Rachel, this is... well, it's unprecedented. We need to consider how this affects the show's integrity." "I understand," Rachel nodded. "That's why I'm here. I want to recuse myself from judging Jake's dishes for the remainder of the competition. I'll still offer critiques during the cooking process, but I won't score his final presentations." The producers exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Linda spoke. "We appreciate your honesty, Rachel. We'll need to discuss this further, but your suggestion seems like a fair compromise." As Rachel left the meeting, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had done the right thing for the show, but now came the harder part, telling Jake the truth. She found Anthony in the green room, pacing nervously. "I told the producers," she said without preamble. "And now we need to tell Jake." Anthony nodded, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "How do you want to do this?" "Together," Rachel said firmly. "He deserves to hear it from both of us." They arranged for Jake to meet them in a private room after that day's filming. As Jake entered, his face lit up with excitement, clearly thinking this was about the competition. "Jake, please sit down," Rachel said gently. "There's something important we need to discuss with you." Jake's smile faltered as he took in their serious expressions. "What's going on? Did I do something wrong?" "No, not at all," Anthony quickly reassured him. "This is... well, it's about your birth parents." Jake's eyes widened, darting between Anthony and Rachel. "Dad? What do you mean? I thought you said you didn't know who my birth mother was." "I didn't," Anthony said, his voice heavy with regret. "Not until very recently." Rachel took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "Jake, what we're trying to say is, I'm your birth mother." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake stared at Rachel, his face a whirlwind of emotions. Shock, disbelief, anger, hope. That's impossible," he finally managed to say. "How? Why? I don't understand." Over the next hour, Rachel and Anthony explained everything. The misunderstanding, the manipulation, the years of separation. Jake listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking a question or demanding clarification. When they finished, Jake stood abruptly. I need some time to process this," he said, his voice shaking. "This is a lot to take in." As he turned to leave, Rachel called out, "Jake, wait, there's one more thing you need to know." She explained her decision to recuse herself from judging his dishes. Jake's brow furrowed. "But that's not fair to you. You shouldn't have to step back because of something that's not your fault." Rachel felt a surge of pride at his concern for her. "It's the right thing to do, Jake. For the integrity of the competition and for you. I want you to win or lose on your own merits, not because of our connection." Jake nodded slowly, a new respect dawning in his eyes. Thank you for telling me the truth, for doing this. I still need time, but thank you." As Jake left the room, Rachel and Anthony shared a look of cautious hope. They had taken the first step towards healing old wounds and building a new future. But as they would soon discover, the road ahead was far from smooth, and the biggest challenges, both in and out of the kitchen, were yet to come. The following weeks of the competition were a whirlwind of emotions and culinary challenges. Jake threw himself into his cooking with renewed vigor, channeling his conflicted feelings into his dishes. Rachel watched from afar, her heart swelling with pride at his creativity and skill, even as she maintained her professional distance. As the competition narrowed to the final 4 contestants, including Jake, the tension in the studio was palpable. The challenge for the day was particularly daunting. Create a tasting menu that told the story of their life through food. Rachel's breath caught as she watched Jake begin his prep. She could see the determination in his eyes, the set of his jaw reminiscent of her own when faced with a challenge. As she made her rounds, offering guidance to the contestants, she approached Jake's station with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. "How are you feeling about this challenge, Jake?" she asked, keeping her tone professional despite the urge to offer motherly encouragement. Jake looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a new depth of understanding. "It's intense," he admitted, "but I think I've found a way to tell my story honestly." Rachel nodded, fighting back the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "I look forward to seeing what you create," she said softly before moving on. As the tasting began, Rachel took her seat at the judges' table, reminding herself that she wouldn't be scoring Jake's dishes. The other contestants presented their menus, each telling poignant stories of their culinary journeys. Finally, it was Jake's turn. He stood before the judges, his posture straight but his hands betraying a slight tremor. "My menu today," Jake began, his voice steady, "is called Lost and Found. It's the story of my life, told through 5 courses." As each dish was presented, Jake narrated its significance. The first course, a delicate egg dish, represented his early years and the fragility of beginnings. The second, a complex soup with hidden depths, symbolized the unanswered questions of his childhood. The third course brought tears to Rachel's eyes, a deconstructed apple pie, reimagined from his earlier dish. "This represents the moment I discovered my passion for cooking," Jake explained, "and the realization that sometimes we need to break things apart to truly understand them." The fourth course was a duo of beef preparations, one traditionally cooked, one modern. "This dish represents the duality of my heritage," Jake said, his eyes flicking briefly to Rachel and Anthony. "The traditional and the contemporary, coming together on one plate." The final course was a dessert that left the judges in awe, a chocolate sphere that, when melted with warm vanilla sauce, revealed a heart of tart berry compote and delicate cake. "This," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion, "represents the walls we build around ourselves and the sweet surprise of what we find when we allow them to melt away." As Jake finished his presentation, there wasn't a dry eye at the judges' table. Even without scoring his dishes, Rachel knew in her heart that Jake had just secured his place in the finale. Later that evening, as Rachel was leaving the studio, she found Jake waiting for her in the parking lot. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice quiet in the still night air, "for giving me the space to tell my story, and for everything." Rachel felt her heart swell. "Jake, I'm not ready to call you Mom," Jake interrupted gently. "Not yet, but I'd like to get to know you, if that's okay." Rachel nodded, tears pricking at her eyes. "I'd like that very much," she managed to say. As they stood there, an understanding passing between them, Rachel realized that regardless of the competition's outcome, they had both already won something far more valuable than any culinary prize. The day of the finale arrived, bringing with it a nervous energy that permeated the entire studio. Jake and his opponent, a talented chef named Sophia, stood at their stations, ready to face the ultimate challenge, creating a 5-course meal that would define their culinary identity. As the competition began, Rachel found herself in the unusual position of being a spectator rather than a judge for Jake's dishes. She watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety as Jake moved confidently around his station, his hands sure and his eyes focused. The hours flew by in a blur of chopping, sautéing, and plating. When time was finally called, both finalists stood back from their stations, exhausted but proud of what they had created. The judging was intense, with each dish scrutinized and debated by the panel. Rachel held her breath as the other judges tasted Jake's creations, fighting the urge to defend or explain his choices. As the final scores were tallied, Marco stepped forward to announce the winner. The studio fell silent, the tension palpable. "The winner of this season's Culinary Masters," Marco paused for dramatic effect, "is Jake Delmonico. The studio erupted in cheers. Jake stood stunned for a moment before a huge grin spread across his face. As confetti rained down, Rachel fought the urge to rush forward and embrace him, instead hanging back and applauding with the rest of the judges. It wasn't until later, at the after-party, that Rachel got a moment alone with Jake. He approached her, his winner's trophy in hand, his eyes shining with a mix of joy and something deeper. "Congratulations, Jake," Rachel said warmly. "You truly earned this." Jake nodded, then surprised her by pulling her into a tight hug. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." As they pulled apart, Jake glanced around before speaking again, his voice low. "I've been thinking about the future, about the restaurant I'll open with the prize money." Rachel nodded encouragingly, curious where this was going. "I was wondering," Jake continued, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "if you'd consider being a consultant, not because you're, well, but because you're one of the best chefs I know, and I'd love to learn from you." Rachel felt her heart soar. "Jake, I'd be honored," she said, her voice thick with emotion. As the party continued around them, Rachel caught Anthony's eye across the room. He raised his glass in a silent toast, a gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps forgiveness. In that moment, Rachel realized that sometimes life's most precious ingredients come together in unexpected ways. The recipe might not be what you originally planned, but with patience, understanding, and a dash of courage, it could turn into something truly extraordinary. As she stood there, surrounded by the warmth of new beginnings and the promise of a future filled with both personal and culinary adventures, Rachel knew that this was just the start of a whole new chapter in all their lives. Thank you for listening until the end. Share your opinion about the story in the comments and let us know which character you liked the most. If this story touched you and you want to hear more, click on the next story appearing on your screen. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a great community of people who share emotional stories together. Until the next story.